Jack Murphy. I'm the founding president of the Livingston County War Museum. I served in that capacity from its beginning for 9 years and turned over the reins to Ed Long, and who's doing a great job with it now. We felt that what we wanted to do up here at this museum was to honor the veterans, not necessarily show off just equipment. We wanted to honor the veterans, and we wanted their name on their uniform and the decorations that they're and what they did in the service. We have a number of uniforms up here where we honor those who died in the wars. Sometimes people seem to forget that wars are about killing people, and so what we do is honor our own people who died in defending the country. Now, I happen to have served in the Korean War, which was 1950 to 53. The type of uniform that I wore over there would have been like this one. The country was, while I was there, it was just bitter cold. It was down in this area of 0 to below 0, and I've had students, when we speak to schools, they say, well, if it's so cold, why didn't you go inside? Well, there wasn't any inside. The inside was a hole in the ground with some sandbags around it. So it was bitter cold, and it was pretty tough fighting the war under those conditions. But it was also cold for the Chinese and North Koreans. Strange thing in that war was that the Chinese came down to the north, and most of their troops had these brown quilted uniforms and tennis shoes. Now, why they had tennis shoes on, they were freezing their feet. I don't know, but we had shoe packs when I started in Korea. I got there in '51, and before I left, we had these what they called Mickey Mouse boots, and they're much warmer. They weren't real good if you were doing a lot of walking, but some of the places I've been, people have asked me, you know, where you went. I sailed from Seattle, Washington. We landed at Yokohama and went into Tokyo Camp Drake, and there we got a bunch of shots. Everybody had told us what a great time you have going out in Japan. We didn't go out in Japan. They gave us a bunch of shots, stuck us back on the ship, shipped us off to Korea. We landed at Incheon, where not too long before the Marines had landed and taken that area, moved up into North Korea. So while I was going across, I found out that I had done engineer training down at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I found out going over, it said, you were in the infantry. I said, no, I'm in the engineers. They said, not anymore, you're not, you're an infantryman. And then I found, when I got there, I found out why they were putting guys in the infantry, because they were losing them pretty fast in the infantry. So that's where I was. We landed in Korea, moved into the division rear, 25th Infantry Division, Tropic Lightning, moved to the division rear at Yeongdong-po, and then from there we were assigned to the regiments. I was with the 14th Infantry Regiment and put with C Company, which was a rifle company, and we moved north on trucks, went around the capital city of Seoul. Seoul didn't look quite like it does now. It was nothing but a bunch of burned out buildings, and now of course the Korean people have made a beautiful city of it and a beautiful country. so we'll take a little credit for that. But we moved up north. We went into an area that was called the Iron Triangle between Comoy and Chorwan, and we stayed there in that area until probably January. We were in that area for Christmas time, Thanksgiving, and we ran an awful lot of patrols out of there. The lines were fairly far apart in that region. Now there may be a half-mile or so, and so we ran a lot of patrols out in that area. You didn't know when you went on these patrols whether you were it was going to be simply a routine patrol, or whether you're going to come under enemy fire, which we frequently did. We would find ourselves in the middle of a mortar attack or machine gun attack, and that wasn't real pleasant. Have people shooting at you. You can hear them when those bullets are going by. It's a sound like you've never heard before. They just kind of sizzle going through the air past you. Then you know that's pretty close. Once we moved east. We kind of flip-flopped with the 2nd Infantry Division. The 2nd Infantry Division had just recently taken Heartbreak Ridge and Bloody Ridge over in the area near the, probably in the mountain range of eastern Korea. We were pretty much flat area where we were over in between Comoy and Chorwan. We had some big hills out in front of us, but we were pretty much level. The 2nd came over, then of course they had the French attached to them, and so the people that actually replaced us were the French Brigade. And when we moved east, we found out that it was a little different situation over there in the Heartbreak Ridge and in the mountain range. The lines were much closer. We looked out of out of your trenches. The first morning looked out, and they were maybe 20 yards to 40 yards from us, eyeball to eyeball, more or less. And so you got a lot of sniper shooting. You didn't run a lot of patrols because there was no room between the lines, and so there was a lot of firing back and forth, and that wasn't real pleasant. We were tied in with a South Korean division there, and the South Korean division, by that time they were pretty good. They were under-equipped, which was fault of our government, and but by the time they got equipped with up-to-date weapons, they did a pretty good job. I know we gave covering fire to them several times that they went up into the North Korean trenches. Now, a strange thing, when we were back over in the Comoy, Chorwan area, we were facing Chinese. And when we got over here into the mountains in the Heartbreak Ridge area, we were facing the North Koreans, and they were a little more fanatical than the Chinese. And so we had, there were a number of exchanges of fire with the North Koreans, both artillery, mortars, machine gun, rifle, and we ran a few patrols up into their area near the trenches, and they tried to come up into our area. Usually their attacks were nighttime, so you pretty much fired into the flashes. After the Heartbreak Ridge area, we moved a little further east into an area called the Punch Bowl. And the Punch Bowl was a big valley, and it was surrounded by mountains. We were along the front edge of the mountains. This was an area that the U.S. Marines had taken. The Heartbreak Ridge, where we left, was taken by the Army's 2nd Infantry Division. This area, the Punch Bowl, was taken by the U.S. Marines. So we had to hold that area, and we saw a lot of patrols coming up. And when I got there, another fellow from my squad and I both were assigned to a .50 caliber machine gun. And every morning, almost every morning anyway, there was a artillery piece just across the way of the North Koreans, and they would open up fire, go right down our front line, firing at all the bunkers and the guys. And so our job was, with the .50, we would zero that in. With an artillery FO, helped us zero it in on that hole that they were firing out that piece out of. And so when they started firing in the mornings about daylight, we opened up with a .50, and I'm sure we gave them some casualties in that area. One of them it was kind of sad, I guess, but war, your job is to kill people, and so this guy came out. He was trying to shovel some of where we'd knocked dirt down in on their gun, and he came running around to the side of it and was out in front, shoveling dirt. He didn't shovel much dirt. So, like I say, war is not pleasant at all. It's tough. You don't forget those things. I know they got guys coming back with this PTS, whatever it is,
PTSDs.
Yeah, PTSD, and that. We had the same problems, whether it was World War II, Korea, Vietnam. We just didn't have a name for it. But it isn't something that you forget. That's a tough part of your life. It's not a long part, but it's a tough part. So anyway, that was our experiences. We had the .50 caliber machine gun. We had BARs, which we used on some of their patrols. You could see the flash, so you fired into the flash of their machine guns, and we finally were supposed to get off the line and head home, and turned out that our replacements, which was our 27th Infantry Regiment, was busy down south. They had been called into the prison camp down in the southern tip of Korea at Kojido, because the prisoners, the North Korean prisoners, had taken over the compound. They took the commanding general a prisoner and some of the MPs, so they sent a rifle platoon, regiment down to restore order. So they finally got there a couple weeks late, and we asked them, "Where you guys been?" They said, "Well, we had to do some business down in Kojido." And they said, "What'd you do?" They said, "Well, we went down there, and they had these guys prisoners in there, including the general who was the commander, and they were pretty arrogant." And he said, I said, "Well, what'd you do?" They said, "We told them release the prisoners and put down all their weapons." And they made a rather vulgar reply to that. So the 27th set up machine guns, and they told them one more time, and they wouldn't do it. And so they said, "So would you open up on them?" Yeah, he said, "We took about 3 truckloads of them out of there." The riot was over, and the Wolfhounds got up, replaced us. But it's tough. You know, you got to be pretty hard and tough in those situations. Finally, time came. It was spring, and time came for us to rotate home. You rotated home on points, and you got, if you're on the front lines, you got more points than the guys who were in the back not getting shot at, which seemed totally right to us. And the officers came around. They said, "Wouldn't you like to sign up for another tour?" Said you'll get another stripe. Well, I wasn't alone. Every one of us said, "No, you keep those stripes. We're going home." We'd had enough. Line companies, a lot different than if you were back somewhere in supply or transportation or something like that. You're right up there nose to nose with them. I've had guys tell me, said, "Well, you know, combat engineers are out in front of the infantry." I said, "Well, if you were in the other guy's trenches, because that's the only people who were out in front of us was North Koreans." So anyway, we got home. When I got home from Korea after my leave, 30 days, I was reassigned to the 3rd Infantry Regiment in Washington, D.C. They sent you, it said Fort Myer, Virginia, and found out that's where the old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment is, and that's the President's Honor Guard. Now, when I got there, I was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, which was over in D.C. instead of the 1st Battalion was at Fort Myer over in Virginia by the Arlington Cemetery and Custis Lee Mansion there. So we went over to the 2nd Battalion. I was with G Company there, and found out later that the Fort McNair, which is a big brick walls around it, used to be the Washington prison, and that's where they hanged the Lincoln conspirators in the Civil War, which I didn't know while I was there. Our job with the 2nd Battalion, we were listed as the White House Guard. We had a whole row of the Joint Chiefs of Staff homes there at Fort McNair, right along the Washington Channel of the Potomac River, and it was spit and polish. And we paraded at least once a week. We did details such as if the 1st Battalion was run with too many funerals over at Arlington, we went over and did the funerals. We always met the President's plane when he came in. We greeted the dignitaries from foreign countries. De Gaulle, who had been one of the great World War II leaders for France, came in, and we met him at the airport. Actually, I was kind of surprised at how big he was. He was a big guy. And we met all those King of Greece, a lot of things like that. And we also did the retirement program for General Omar Bradley. He was a little guy. And we marched in review in his retirement, and then we worked at the Officers Club, parking the cars and things like that. And of course it was interesting because you had all these different uniforms of these foreign countries. So, you know, Russians and French and all of them were there, and General Bradley. So we got to see a lot of things. We got called to alert once while I was there. It was when the Rosenbergs, who were people who had sold the atomic bomb secrets to the Russians, were to be executed, and so they were afraid there were going to be riots down at the White House. So they wanted us as backup for the Washington, D.C. police. Backup consisted of an armored car with a .50 caliber machine mounted on it and M1 rifles. We slept in our uniforms, our combat uniforms, and I happened to be the guy who had been up in the turret of the M20 armored car with the .50 caliber machine gun. I was a motor sergeant at that point, I was a staff sergeant. And fortunately, the DC police were able to handle it. Probably fortunate also for the rioters, because I don't think they knew what was coming. All of our NCOs in the old guard were combat veterans. We'd been in Korea. Our officers had been in Korea or World War II, and it was a pretty good unit. And one other thing that we did that was, I haven't forgotten, it was kind of special. We marched in the lead unit of the inaugural parade for President Dwight D. Eisenhower, which meant it was about a 4-hour long parade. We were the lead unit along with the U.S. Army band, and of course we marched we stood underneath the Capitol building. They built a platform there, and the president was sworn in up there, and we stood right below it. You could hear it, but you didn't want to stand there and look up. That wouldn't have been good. That was another funny thing that people have asked me, when the president would either be laying a wreath over in Arlington, or he'd be coming in off his airplane. Did you get to look at him? Did you get to speak? I said, you kidding? You didn't look and you didn't speak. You stood at attention or parade rest. You didn't look. But you could tell he was there. But so we inaugurated President Eisenhower. We marched from the Capitol building all the way up past the White House. They had to stand there. Now, how the president got from the car behind us to the reviewing stand at the White House, I never did figure that one out, but he was there, and the vice president, of course. And so we marched there on around, and then about 2 blocks past the White House, we got on buses and went back to Fort McNair. But we had practiced for this for weeks, and so we were a pretty good unit. I like to think probably the old guard is about as good a unit as there is anywhere. Other parts of the old guard that I was not in with the tomb guards over the tombs of the unknown soldier over in Arlington. Those guys were a part of our regiment. The Army band was a part of our regiment, and but they were stationed over at Fort Myer. Also the caissons and the horses that you see pulling those caissons, like when President Kennedy's funeral, with the reverse boots, and they'll have the black horse, one guy holding the black horse by the reins, and then the other horses, which are kind of a grayish white colored horses, and then they would be pulling the caisson. So we saw a lot of things, and I met some very good friends. This was the uniform that we wore. We wore it 5 years before the rest of the Army went to it. They were still wearing the olive drab and the khakis. We went to the green. The rest of the Army went to it in '58. We went to it in 1953, 5 years before the rest. So it was kind of a strange, it was a phenomenon at that time. People would ask you, what army are you in with, the green uniform? We'd tell them, frequently we'd make something up, we're Russian army or some dumb thing like that, but after a while they got used to seeing it around Washington. This is a mannequin with my decorations and different things on it. We have this on all of our uniforms. It tells about the guys, and if we can, we put their picture. Very close friend of mine, right here, name was Bob Atchison. Bob and I were both sergeants at the old guard. We bunked together there in the non-coms rooms in the barracks. And he was from New York City. I went home with him several times. Bob earned the Silver Star in Korea. He was with the 2nd Infantry Division, and then once he got out, Bob became a New York City detective. He served with the 26th Squad in New York City as a New York City policeman. And of course, I became a teacher, basketball coach, and I was a teacher for 48 years and a basketball coach for quite a while. I was fortunate enough to be inducted into the Illinois Basketball Coaches Hall of Fame. Also down at Taylorville, I was in their Hall of Fame, and here at Pontiac in their Hall of Fame. I guess if you're fortunate enough to have your teams win a lot of games, they do those things. I was fortunate my teams won 530 games, which is probably more than most people ever see. And some of my friends are up here. Most of the Korean War veterans are good friends of mine. And we honor all of them. There's a lot of World War II uniforms up here in the museum. And we have been selected as the top all-volunteer museum in the state of Illinois, which is quite an honor. And that wasn't during my time as president, that was when Ed was the president. And those guys have done a great job, and I'm happy to see that it's carried on in the tradition that we started, where it's strictly honoring people who served. And that's what we want to do. We don't have a lot of other equipment. We do have some, and there are some very special ones. Ed can tell about that, but we've had a machine gun come in there that was off Iwo Jima, which was donated to us by the guy that took it. And he had knocked out the guys, the Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima that were firing that machine gun on him, and killed several members of his squad. And he took them out and later brought the machine gun home, and was told that they had to be in a museum because he couldn't have a full automatic weapon like that. So it's in our museum. It's under lock and key. That's just one of the things that's up here. There's a lot, and there's just endless stories up here. These are all very special people, and it's been a big honor to me to be able to be a part of organizing it and remembering these guys, because I think people need to remember what they've done, why the old saying, freedom isn't free. And these are the people that had to pay for it. And like I say, it's no picnic. So I thank you for, giving our story to the people, and I'm honored to be a part of it all.